Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck number 194 and it's titled Summon Uncle Istvan. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, our random card was suggested to us by Vintage over on Patreon/Discord, and that card, if you couldn't tell by the title of the video, is Uncle Istvan. And Uncle Istvan is 1 black for a 1/3. It says summon Uncle Istvan, but it's just a human at this point. All damage done to Uncle Istvan by creatures is reduced to 0. Now, this is a bit of a tricky card because if you look at this card with its name and everything about it, it does feel like a legendary creature, but unfortunately, it's actually not, so we couldn't play it as our commander. However, on this channel, I play by my own rules, so it is going to be our commander this week. Uncle Istvan is in the command zone. I know that it's technically not a legal commander, so if that is something you're worried about, I do have several legendary creatures in the 99 as well. And the one that I'm going to highlight for you, if you don't want Uncle Istvan to be the commander, then maybe swap in Jaren, Corrupted Bishop, who is in the 99 and can very easily slot into the command zone. Obviously, as we talk about this deck tech and we go through with the game later on, I am going to be using Uncle Istvan as the commander, but I did want to highlight a backup just in case maybe your playgroup isn't okay with a non-legend in the command zone. With that being said, though, we're going to move on to the themes of our deck and start to talk a little bit about what makes Uncle Istvan worthy of being in the command zone. So the very first thing that I wanted to highlight with this deck is the fact that this is a mono-black human deck. There are not a ton of cards outside of white that really care about humans, but there are some in black because it does tend to be one of the secondary colors for humans, meaning we get cards like Zathrid Necromancer, which is 2 and a black for a human wizard. It's a 2/2, and whenever Zathrid Necromancer or another human creature you control dies, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token. Now, obviously, zombies are not humans, but this gives us a way to kind of, well, I don't want to say recycle our humans because that feels like a weird statement to make, but turn our humans into zombies in case we get hit with something like a board wipe, maybe they die in combat, someone just removes something. We still at least get something out of the deal, and because we're playing so many humans and things that make humans, this is going to be triggering probably pretty regularly. Moving on to our next theme of the deck, this one is going to be Voltron, and in a way that kind of cares about humans, if that makes any sense. So because Uncle Istvan can't be dealt damage by creatures, we may as well suit him up with a bunch of equipment and send him in to do some damage. And we're lucky enough that there's actually quite a few equipments that specifically care about humans. So for example, we have Heavy Matic, which is 3 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, and as long as equipped creature is a human, it gets an additional +1/+1, and it equips for 2. Now obviously, 3 mana for an artifact and then 2 to equip just to give +2/+2 is not phenomenal. I will be honest, Heavy Matic, probably not the best version of this that exists, but I did want to highlight it because there was a lot of equipments that say a creature gets something, but if it's a human, it gets an additional something, and we really did load up on a lot of those equipments. So ideally, we're building a board to go wide with all of our humans, and then we're also going kind of tall with Uncle Istvan. And then finally, we get to our third theme of the deck, and this one is going to be Sacrifice. Because there are so many humans, especially in black, that care either about dying or seeing other creatures die, we may as well sacrifice some of our own creatures to take advantage of some of those synergies. And one of the good ways we can do that is with Ashnod Flesh Mechanist, which is 1 black for a 1/1 legendary creature human artificer. She has Death Touch. Whenever she attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, create a tapped Power Stone token. Then, you can also pay 5 and exile a creature card from your graveyard to create a tapped 3/3 colorless zombie artifact creature token. So while this isn't the most efficient sacrifice outlet, and also not the most efficient token generator, it's still a great way for us to generate a little extra value. Because we have so many equipments in our deck, being able to make the Power Stones is actually surprisingly relevant as the game goes on, and it's a great way for us to make sure that we're always getting a little bit of value out of our creatures, because we can sacrifice it and then with something like Zathrid Necromancer, turn it into a zombie, and then maybe exile it out of our graveyard later to make another zombie. So we can kind of just keep our board state moving. But those are all of our themes for this week, and the next thing I want to do is take a look at some key cards. These are the cards that synergize really well with what we're trying to do, and in some cases can be win conditions or value pieces all on their own. So the very first key card that I would like to highlight is going to be Priest of Forgotten Gods. And the Priest of Forgotten Gods is 1 and a black for a 1/2 human cleric. You can tap it and sacrifice 2 other creatures. Any number of target players each lose 2 life and sacrifice a creature. Then you add 2 black and draw a card. This is a surprisingly powerful card when we have a lot of creatures that we want to be sacrificing, because forcing all of our opponents to sacrifice a creature and lose 2 life, while also letting us draw a card and make 2 additional mana, means we can kind of just outgrind the rest of the table, because most of the time we are going to have creatures that want to die and our opponents are not. The only really decent way they could get around this is by having a lot of expendable creatures like tokens, but the odds of that happening are pretty slim, so I don't think it's something that's going to be very common as the games go on, but it's certainly not going to be impossible. Otherwise, I think Priest is very good at helping us just bump ahead of the rest of the table with card draw and mana, and it's a great way to make sure that we're always staying ahead of our opponents in life total as well. Moving on to our next key card, this time we have Horn of Gondor. And Horn of Gondor, 3 mana for a legendary artifact. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, and you can pay 3 and tap it to create X 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens, where X is the number of humans you control. Since we are a human deck, being able to essentially double the number of humans we control at any moment is incredibly powerful, and it's going to give us a lot of sacrifice synergies because they're just 1/1 tokens. We can sacrifice them to the Priest of Forgotten Gods, we can sacrifice them to Ashnod. All of these different things are going to give us a lot of value as the game goes on, and Horn of Gondor kind of gives us that like unending supply of human tokens, which in some cases can just overwhelm the rest of the board. So while it does seem a little slow to get going, it's 3 to play and 3 to activate. Once we have it in play, we can activate it pretty much every turn and just slowly build up a board that nobody else is going to be able to deal with. And then finally, we get to the final card of our key cards, and that one is Skurse Flayer. And this is another human that doesn't look like much on the surface, but is incredibly synergistic with what our deck is doing. It's 1 and a black for a 1/1 human cleric, and you can pay 3 and a black, tap it, sacrifice a human, and destroy target creature. Like I said, being able to have a ton of humans to sacrifice is kind of what keeps this deck rolling, but having essentially a 4 mana removal spell plus a sacrifice outlet just stapled to a human means that at any point we can kind of just remove anything on the board. There's no qualifications for this. It's not a non-black creature, non-artifact creature. It's just destroying any creature. So as long as we have something to sacrifice, which we most likely will, and have 4 mana available, which is less likely but still not impossible, Skurse Flayer just removes the biggest threat at the table every single turn. And that is something that cannot be understated in terms of its power, because if we can keep our opponents in check with 1 card, we can kind of just run them over with the rest of our board. So those are all of our key cards for this week, and the next thing we're going to do is of course talk about some cool interactions. These are cards that synergize really well with each other, and in some cases are just fun cards that I want to highlight. So our first cool interaction is going to be between Ayara's Oathsworn and Archpriest of Shadows. So Ayara's Oathsworn is 1 and a black for a 2/2 human knight. It's got Menace, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, if it has fewer than 4 +1/+1 counters on it, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then, if it has exactly 4 +1/+1 counters on it, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Now that is a lot of text to essentially say that when it hits something, put a counter on it. If it's got 4, we get to tutor a card. Now, this can be any card, and it only triggers once. So even if you get it to 4 and then keep going up, it's no longer going to let you tutor. It only tutors when it has exactly 4 counters on it. But that means that if we play it on turn 2, it's still going to not trigger until we hit turn 6, which is quite a ways away. And one way we can kind of get around that is with Archpriest of Shadows, which is 3 black for a human warlock. It's a 4/4, and it has backup 1, so when it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. If it's another creature, it gains the following abilities: Death Touch, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or battle, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So Archpriest of Shadows has very quickly become one of my favorite cards in Commander. You may have noticed I put it in almost every black deck that I make at this point because it is just an absurd card that does so much work throughout the course of a game. But being able to put an additional counter on the Oathsworn and kind of get that tutor ability a turn earlier than our opponents are expecting means that we can really do a lot with what we have on the board. We can get whatever card we need. Maybe it's a board wipe or a removal spell, card draw, ramp, whatever. We can get the best thing in any certain situation. Plus, being able to give the Oathsworn, which is 2 mana for a 2/2 menace, being able to give it Death Touch and also be able to return a creature from our graveyard to the battlefield means our opponents really don't want to let it hit them. But if they don't want to let it hit them, they're going to have to block a 2/2 Menace Death Toucher, which is guaranteed to take 2 creatures with it. So it really puts our opponents in a situation where they can either give us extra value, possibly even let us tutor up a card, or they can lose 2 of their creatures. And that's not a great decision to have to make. So I think that highlighting these 2 cards, while alone are both very powerful, together can be incredibly synergistic and can honestly just win the game. Moving on to our next cool interaction though, this time I'm going to highlight a couple of different cards. This is Homicide Investigator and Marionette Apprentice. So Homicide Investigator, 1 black for a 2/2 human detective. Whenever 1 or more non-token creatures you control die, investigate. This ability triggers only once each turn. This is a great way to draw cards, being able to essentially pay an extra 2 mana whenever a creature dies to draw a card. But it works even better when we have Marionette Apprentice, because Marionette Apprentice is 1 black for a 1/2 human artificer. It's got Fabricate 1, and whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. The key to Marionette Apprentice is the line whenever another creature or artifact you control. So Homicide Investigator, when a creature dies, will make us an artifact, it's a clue, and when we sacrifice that artifact, we trigger Marionette Apprentice. So not only are we now being rewarded for creatures dying with card draw, we are being rewarded for creatures dying with card draw and draining out our opponents. So this is not only a win condition, but it draws us cards to get to other win conditions or more sacrifice outlets or more sacrifice fodder, and puts us in a position where just about every game action we are taking begins to hurt our opponents. And usually when the deck reaches that point, it's very difficult to stop because there's just nothing our opponents can do that isn't going to wind up hurting them in some way. So that's why I wanted to highlight these 2 cards, and originally I was going to put Marionette Apprentice in the key card section of this deck tech because it really is just that good. But I wanted to highlight it alongside Homicide Investigator because I think that's also a synergy that's worth looking at. So with that being said, we're going to move into one of the final pieces of this deck tech, which is the budget section. And this week, our budget came in at $89.20, so just under our $100 budget limit. And the most expensive card in our deck was Nazgul Battle Mace at a massive $12.28. So this is a card that has been slowly creeping up in price, and I am very sad to see it because it is a phenomenal card, and I've been putting it in pretty much every equipment deck that I've been making. But given its price, that may be something that has to stop here pretty soon. However, I do think it is worth it in this deck, especially with Uncle Istvan, because it is 5 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature has Menace, Death Touch, Annihilator 1, and whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent, put that card onto the battlefield under your control unless that player pays 3 life. Then it equips for 3. So it's very expensive. 5 mana to play and 3 to equip is a total of 8 mana just to get it on a creature. But being able to give something Menace, Death Touch, Annihilator 1, and then also take the thing they sacrifice is very, very powerful. And you gotta keep in mind, because a lot of our synergies involve sacrificing, we can kind of make our opponents sacrifice a decent amount of creatures as the game goes on, and that still triggers the Battle Mace. It doesn't matter if they're sacrificed to the Annihilator trigger, or if they're sacrificed to anything else. So we can really put the pressure on our opponents and either take their things or make them pay 3 life, which is very, very difficult once you're sacrificing multiple things a turn, because you kind of just start to run out of life, and then once you run out of life and you're giving your opponents your things, then they just kind of start beating you with your own stuff. So while I don't think this is 100% necessary, you can certainly cut the Battle Mace if you're worried about price, drop it to about $77, which is significantly more manageable than $89. But if you are able to squeeze it into the deck, I do think it is definitely worth it, especially when considering Menace and Death Touch together. Very good. Uncle Istvan can't be dealt damage by creatures, so it really just puts our opponents in a bad situation. Finally, though, we're going to also talk about the additional piece of the deck tech in terms of budget, and that is a card that I think you could put into the deck if you don't mind spending a little bit of extra money. And that card is going to be Species Specialist. So this deck is very good at drawing cards, but you can always be better, right? So Species Specialist is 2 black for a 2/3 human warrior. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Whenever a creature of the chosen type dies, you may draw a card. Obviously, the type that we're going to pick is human, because we are hoping to sacrifice a ton of humans as the game goes on. But the nice thing about the Specialist is it doesn't have to be our creatures. Human is the most popular creature type in all of Magic, so there's a very good chance our opponents will also have humans, and so when those humans die, we would still get to draw the cards. Obviously, this is a little bit outside of our budget range. It's $13.86, but if you don't mind slotting it in, then you would of course have to take a card out. And the card that I would recommend taking out for this is Fiend of the Shadows, which is 3 black for a 3/3 human wizard. It's got flying. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles a card from their hand, and you may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. And you can sacrifice a human to regenerate Fiend of Shadows. Now, if I'm being perfectly honest, originally, when I put this in, it was just a free sacrifice outlet, because you can just sacrifice a human to regenerate it. You don't have to have it regenerate. You can just do that as many times as you want. But I started to realize its ability actually wasn't that great, and spending 5 mana for a free sacrifice outlet when we have multiple other options at 1, 2, and 3 mana was pretty rough, and I didn't really feel like it was good enough for what we wanted to do. Plus, like I said, the ability also not great, because we can't spend mana as though it were mana of any color. So if our opponents exile a white spell, for example, we have no way to cast it. And that's not really where we want to be. I would much rather draw a ton of cards with Species Specialist and then cast our own spells, because they synergize with what we are doing anyway. So I think that's probably better. If you think I'm wrong, please let me know. I would love to hear defenses of Fiend of the Shadows, because I've never actually gotten to cast it, I won't lie. Every time I've had it in my hand, I kind of just wanted to cast something else, which I think is a sign that it probably should be taken out for something else. But let me know in the comments if you think it's worth including, or if maybe there's another card you think could replace it. But with all of that being said, before we jump into a game with this deck, because obviously we got to get a game in, see how we can do, I do want to take a second to highlight some of the ways that you can help support the channel if that's something you're interested in doing. So as always, you can just like the video and subscribe to the channel. That is incredibly helpful, and I do appreciate it as much as everyone else. But if you do want to go a little bit above and beyond, you can find us over on Patreon or right here on YouTube as a channel member, where you can join at several different tiers of $3, $5, or $7 a month. And doing that gets you access to a bunch of cool things, like access to a Discord channel where we brew up a lot of the decks and also play a lot of the games. And I have had some questions about the Discord channel lately. If that's something you're interested in, it is at the $5 level on Patreon or as a channel member. That is not a permanent inclusion. So for example, if you join at $5 and want to shift back down to $3 later, that does not kick you out of the Discord. If you decide to cancel for any reason, that doesn't kick you out of the Discord. So if you do want to join, I would highly recommend it. It would essentially just be $5 for your first month. And then if you want to change it, you are of course always welcome to do so. I understand people's situations change, so don't stress too much about that. But I do want to shout out our amazing patrons and channel members right now. So a huge thank you goes out to William Swiftfoot, Doodle, Eric Way, Jeff Winger, Jeffrey Boos, Salty and Sunshine, Tyler Esme, Sven Van Nimwegen, Paddywhack, Keegan Tawney, and Jakar. So alongside all of our patrons, channel members, and everything else, I do also want to highlight a collaboration that we are doing right now with Deck Dwell, where if you are interested in getting a Deck Dwell box, you can head on over to Amazon using our discount code Dungeon15 or using the link that I put in the description of this video, now through the end of November, and it is very close to the end of November, so if you are watching this even just a couple days late, I do apologize, but you may have missed it. They are very good deck boxes. They're pretty big. They're able to hold 130 cards, and they're just kind of sturdy overall. They're pretty nice, pretty cheap. They, with the discount code, are only about $17. So if you're looking to pick up some deck boxes, I do highly recommend you check them out. I think they're worth it. I think they're super cool. But like I said, check it out before the end of November. And as always, if you're interested in any of our other social media accounts, check us out there as well. But I think I've rambled on quite enough about that. So let's take a look at our opponents and see how this Uncle Istvan deck can do in a game. So obviously, we are going to be joined by 3 separate opponents this week, and it is going to be Averna the Chaos Bloom, which is being played by Cole, Urza, Chief Artificer, being played by Jason, and Merkul, Lord of Bones, being played by Cow. Starting off with Averna, this is a Cascade deck. He just wants to cast, well, a bunch of giant spells and cascade into other spells, and then get some lands and ramp and do some, kind of value nonsense kind of stuff. I've played against Averna a couple of times, and it's really one of those decks that you can't let it get going, because a lot of times once it gets going, it's very difficult to stop. So I'm excited to see what Cole did with it, but I'm also a little nervous, and I think if I had to pick one of these decks to be the most threatening deck at the table, it's probably Averna. Moving on to Jason and his Urza Chief Artificer deck. This deck is almost entirely the pre-con deck. I think he may have changed a couple of cards, but not too many. I could also be wrong, and it's probably just a pre-con, and if that's the case, then I just got to watch out for Jason, because he's very good at playing pre-con decks. But this is an artifact creature deck, which is also a big concern, and Urza making a construct token every single turn that gets bigger based on the number of artifacts is also a pretty big concern. Our creatures are not going to keep pace with that. So I definitely think we have to go a little bit wider than the constructs, which, again, since he's making at least one a turn, is going to be a little bit difficult, but I think we can do it. And then finally, Cow playing his Merkul Lord of Bones deck. This is a life gain / Soul Sisters style deck. He kind of wants a ton of like ETB value creatures alongside things that gain him life. So that way when they die and come back as enchantments, he gets death triggers again, he gets enter the battlefield triggers again, and then can gain more life to trigger some other effects that he may have. And I think that's a very cool take on kind of like Aristocrats and Soul Sisters, because the life gain aspect isn't something that I would have thought of if I were to be building Merkul. I mean, I built Merkul and it was a sliver deck, so obviously not life gain. But Merkul is very cool as a concept. I mean, it's even in his name, right? Mer, cool. So overall, I'm very excited to see what this deck can do. We've seen it on the channel before, but it didn't get to do a whole bunch last time. So hopefully this time it can do a little bit more. But these are our opponents for this week, so let me know down in the comments which deck you think is going to walk away the winner. I'm very excited for this game. I hope you all are as well, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Cole goes first, followed by Jason, Cow, and then myself. On Cole's first turn, he plays a breeding pool. Jason plays an island. Cow plays a myriad landscape. I play a swamp and cast Carrion Feeder, which can sacrifice a creature to put a +1/+1 counter on itself. Cole plays an exotic orchard, then casts Arcane Signet. Jason plays a swamp and casts Azorius Signet. Cow plays a swamp and casts a Soul Ring, then sacrifices his Myriad Landscape, searching his library for 2 basic lands, putting them into play tapped. I play a swamp and cast Dockside Chef, which lets me pay 2 mana to sacrifice a creature or artifact and draw a card. Then I attack Jason for 1 with the Carrion Feeder. Cole plays a Command Tower, then cast Rampant Growth and also cast Farseek, searching his library for a total of 2 basic lands, putting them both into play tapped. Jason plays a Vault of Whispers, then cast Whirler Rogue, making 2 1/1 Thopter tokens when it enters, and letting him tap 2 artifacts to make a creature unblockable until the end of turn. Cow plays a Fortified Village and casts Topiary Stomper, searching his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. On my turn I play a Swamp, then attack Cow for 2. Cole plays a forest and casts his commander, Averna the Chaos Bloom, letting him put a land into play whenever he cascades from among the lands revealed by the cascade. Jason casts his own Soul Ring, then casts Sharding Sphinx, letting him make a Thopter token whenever he deals combat damage to an opponent with an artifact creature. This lets him attack me for 2 with the Rogue, Cow for 1 with a Thopter, and Cole for 1 with a Thopter, making 2 more Thopter tokens. On Cow's turn, he casts an Outland Liberator, making it day, and letting Cow sacrifice it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. He also cast Mother of Runes, which can tap to give target creature protection from a color of Cow's choice until the end of turn, then also cast Willow Dusk Essence Seer, which can be activated to put a number of +1/+1 counters on target creature equal to either the life he's gained or lost this turn. I play a Swamp and cast Last Wraith, making a 0/0 Germ token and equipping it, giving it +X/+X, where X is the number of swamps I control, which is currently 4. Cole casts his own Soul Ring, then casts Call Forth the Tempest, cascading twice, casting both Violent Outburst, giving his creatures +1/+0 and cascading again, this time hitting Chart a Course, drawing 2 cards and discarding a card, then still casts Swiftfoot Boots with the Tempest, putting an island and a forest into play tapped, then doing 8 damage to each creature since the combined mana value of other spells he cast this turn was 8, wiping the board. Once that's resolved, he attacks Jason for 5 with Averna. On Jason's turn, he cast his commander, Urza Chief Artificer, giving his artifact creatures menace, and, at the beginning of his end step, he creates a 0/0 construct token that gets +1/+1 for each artifact he controls. Then he also casts Tonos, Solemn Survivor, and plays an Orzhov Basilica, returning an island to his hand. Finally, in his end step, Jason creates a construct token that's currently a 4/4. Cow casts Torsten, founder of Benalia, revealing the top 7 cards of his library when he enters, putting any number of creature and or lands from among them into his hand and the rest on the bottom. This lets him put Skullport Merchant, Croson Verge, and 2 planes, and, notably, when Torsten dies, Cow creates 7 1/1 soldiers. At this point, we realize Jason didn't have the mana to cast both Urza and Tonos, so he returns Tonos to his hand, and after that, Cow plays a Plains. On my turn, I play a swamp and cast my commander, Uncle Istvan, which can't be dealt damage by creatures. Then I pay 2 life to equip Lashwraith to Uncle Istvan, giving him +5/+5. On Cole's turn, he cast Emoti, Celebrant of Bounty, giving his spells with mana value 6 or greater Cascade, and also cascading itself, letting Cole cast Heroic Intervention, giving his permanents hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn, also putting Fiery Islet into play. On Jason's turn, he moves straight to combat, attacking Cow for 4 with his Construct token. Then, in his second main phase, Jason actually casts Tawnos Solemn Survivor and plays a Mistfault Bridge. Then at the end of turn, Jason makes another Construct. On Cow's turn, he plays a Plains and casts Skullport Merchant, making a treasure token when it enters, then immediately using the treasure to cast his commander, Merkul, Lord of Bones, now exiling any creature he controls when it dies, and creating a token copy of it that's an enchantment. He then moves to combat and attacks Cole for 7 with Torsten. On my turn, I play a swamp and cast Archpriest of Shadows, backing up Uncle Istvan, giving him a +1/+1 counter, Death Touch, and letting me return a creature from my graveyard to the battlefield when it deals combat damage to a player. I then attack Cole for 8 with my commander, and return Carrion Feeder from my graveyard to the battlefield when I do damage. In my second main phase, I pay 4 life to re-equip the Lashwraith to Archpriest of Shadows, giving it +6/+6. Cole cast a Rampaging Baloths, which makes a 4/4 beast token whenever a land enters under his control, also cascading into Tireless Provisioner, which makes a food or treasure when a land enters under his control, and he also puts a Wooded Foothills into play tapped. Jason cast Arcane Signet and attacks Cole for 14 with both of his constructs. Before damage, Cole casts Siege Smash, destroying one of the constructs, meaning he only takes 6. Then, in Jason's second main phase, he plays an Azorius Chancery, returning a swamp to his hand, and at the end of turn, makes a Construct token. On Cow's turn, he plays an Undergrowth Sanctum, then casts a Viscera Seer, which lets him sacrifice a creature to scry 1. After that, he moves to combat and attacks Jason for 7 with Torsten. Then, in Cow's second main phase, he casts a Pristine Talisman and casts Blossoming Bogbeast, which lets him gain 2 life when it attacks, then gives all of his creatures +X/+X and trample until the end of turn, where X is the amount of life he's gained that turn. On my turn, I move straight to combat, attacking Cow for 10 with the Archpriest of Shadows. Before blocks, Cow sacrifices Torsten with Skullport Merchant, drawing a card, creating 7 1/1 soldier tokens, then exiling Torsten to create a copy of it that's an enchantment, again letting him reveal the top 7 cards of his library, this time putting Reclamation Sage, Temple of Malady, and 2 Plains into his hand. Once all of that is resolved, Cow is able to block the Archpriest with a soldier, killing it and taking no damage. In my second main phase, I cast Disciple of Bolas, sacrificing the Archpriest when it enters to gain 10 life and draw 10 cards, since it had 10 power. I then also play a Myriad Landscape and cast Keen Duelist, letting myself and target opponent reveal the top cards of our libraries in my upkeep, putting them into our hands and losing life equal to the mana value of the revealed cards. Finally, I pay 4 life to re-equip Lashwraith to Uncle Istvan, giving him +6/+6. Cole plays a Mountain, making a 4/4 Beast token and a Treasure token, then sacrifices his Wooded Foothills, paying a life to search his library for a Cinderglade, putting it into play, making another Beast and Treasure. He then casts Craterhoof Behemoth, cascading into Birds of Paradise, putting a Mountain into play, making another Beast and another Treasure. Then the Craterhoof resolves, giving his creatures +7/+7 and trample until the end of turn, since he controls 7 creatures. Once that's resolved, he also casts Release to the Wind, exiling his own Craterhoof and letting him recast it for free. In response, though, Cow sacrifices Skullport Merchant, scrying 1, exiling it, creating a token copy of it that's an enchantment, and making a treasure token. This treasure lets him cast Swords to Plowshares, exiling Cole's Craterhoof before it can be exiled, letting Cole gain 12 life since the Craterhoof's power was 12. After that, Cole sacrifices Fiery Islet to draw a card, and also equips Swiftfoot Boots to a beast token, giving it haste and hexproof. Finally, he attacks Jason for 11 with Averna, attacks me for 10 with Emoti, and attacks Cow for 34 with the rest of his board. Before blocks, Jason activates Taunos, milling 2 and creating a token copy of an artifact token he controls, letting him make another construct. Then, Jason blocks Averna with 2 8/8 constructs, killing one of the tokens and Cole's commander, while Jason takes no damage. Cow blocks with Merkul, not killing his commander since it becomes indestructible as soon as Cow drops below 20 life, and Viscera Seer, killing that and returning as an enchantment, but he still takes 28 damage. Finally, I block with Uncle Istvan, killing Emoti and taking no damage. On Jason's turn, he plays a Swamp, then casts Thopter Shop, letting him draw a card once a turn when an artifact creature he controls dies. Once that's resolved, he moves to combat and attacks Cole for 16 with both of his construct tokens. Before the blocks, Cole casts Entish Restoration, sacrificing a land to search his library for 3 basic lands, putting them into play tapped, making 3 more beast tokens and 3 more treasures. Then he uses all 4 of his beast tokens to block Jason's constructs, killing each creature while Cole takes no damage and Jason draws a card. Unfortunately, at this point in the game, my computer decided to stop recording, meaning I don't have footage of how the game ends, but luckily we do have an artist's recreation of it. So, with no further ado, Jason winds up ending his turn and passing to Cow, who casts Revenge, doubling his life total to 16 and cutting mine in half down to 20. This means he's able to attack Cole and Jason with his board of soldiers and Blossoming Bog Beast, gaining an additional 2 life and triggering the Bog Beast, giving his board +11/+11 and trample, knocking both Cole and Jason out of the game. Then, in his second main phase, Cow casts Asterion the Decadent, making target opponent lose life equal to the amount of life they've lost this turn, and since I've lost 20 life and am currently at 20, I just lose the rest of my life, knocking me out and winning Cow the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. Definitely a lot happening in that game, and I do want to apologize for the very end of the game where my camera did wind up cutting out. I realized afterwards that I had actually run out of storage on my disk drive, so I didn't have enough storage to finish recording the game, but luckily we did only miss the last turn, and our resident artist did make up an amazing storyboard to make sure that everybody was essentially there for the last turn. I know they were very lifelike and incredibly realistic, so a huge shout out to our resident artist, which is me, but, you know, beyond that, hopefully, you guys also enjoyed the video. I think our deck did very well. I was very impressed by how much damage it could churn out, the value that it kind of kept accruing, getting creatures out of the graveyard, sacrificing things for value, the amount of cards that it was able to draw. I think it's definitely more of a grindy style deck, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it kind of goes along with the mono black humans, but I was very happy with how the deck turned out, and I'm not usually huge on mono black decks, but this is one that I may decide to hang around with and kind of tweak a little bit because I think it could be improved just a little bit. I just haven't quite figured out how yet. Though, moving around the table, talking about everybody else's decks, Cole's deck, also very impressive, just kind of cascades into cascades into cascades and value into value into value. And I think that if Cole had had even just one more turn, or honestly had been able to resolve that blink effect on the Craterhoof Behemoth, I think that he could have very easily won the game. So that one little intervention from Cow was just enough to stop him from winning, and I think that's all that Cow needed, because obviously he then took out the victory at the end. But we're not quite to Cow yet, so let's talk about Jason. I think that his deck also did very well. I was kind of impressed at how quickly the constructs grew. I don't think they were ever smaller than 4/4s for him, which is very impressive considering he can just churn them out every single turn. And then with Tawnos making additional copies and being able to have other cards in his deck that care about it, I think it was just a very cool style of deck, even though it was artifacts, and I'm not huge on artifacts, but still very sweet. And then, of course, finally, our victor, Cow. So congratulations to Cow for winning. Being able to just get a ton of value with Merkul was very sweet. And I really liked the synergy he had with Merkul's ability to get indestructible, because that's not something we normally see. He was actually able to block with it and still go below 20, which meant that Merkul didn't die in combat, because by state-based effects, it immediately gets the indestructibility because damage is dealt at the same time. So I thought that was a very sweet interaction and something that I feel like could somehow be built around, but I'm not 100% sure how. If you do, let me know in the comments. But overall, very sweet game. Loved everybody's decks. I thought it was a ton of fun. And as always, if you have suggestions for future videos, please do let me know down in the comments. I would love to build some decks for people. I kind of just have that itch right now, and with my winter break coming up since I'm a teacher, there's going to be a little bit of spare time. So if you need a deck built or you're just interested, please do let me know and I would love to get to it. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the deck tech and I hope you enjoyed the game. And as always, I will see you on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.